there are 7 whole notes. And then there's 5 half notes, which are the sharps and the flats. On the piano keyboard, the white notes are the 7 notes, and the black keys are the half tones. That gives us 12. That's where the zodiac got his 12 signs from, dividing a whole into 7 harmonious parts. That's the octave of music. However, if we take music theory into account, in certain regards, every key has to have its opposite key. So we got 7 basic keys, 7 basic tones. We've got 7 basic half tones, which gives us 14. So I was trying to preserve the principle of duality in this chart when I put it together. Now there are 12 keys that we can create music in. There are also 2 other keys which happen to be the same as 2 of the others. So they only use 12, which is fine. But mathematically there's 14, 2 being duplicates of 2 others. So I laid out the 14 on here. And it works. It really does work. I developed this chart to build a wind chime tuned to an individual person. So I could determine what their keynote was, and then I could derive all the other notes that would go into conformity with the planets, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Question, I think Henry's going.
I just, the astronomers have been attacking the astrologers recently, and one of the evidence that they use to back up as opposed to the fraudulence of astrology is that there's 13 signs rather than 12. You know, astronomy on another side. I forget the name of it right now, but they could very well be a more balanced chart with 14, as you're saying here right now. And also, I like your comments on how do you think Walter Russell's stuff fits in this. Does Walter Russell's stuff match what you're talking about here very well?
Yeah, I haven't read a whole lot of Walter's stuff. What I have read matches almost exactly. Tim and I were going to get together. In fact, we've reiterated our agreement to get together and write a treatise on comparing Russell and Keely together. We haven't just had time to do that. The other question about Tim Binder. The other question about 13 versus 12 and 14 and 64 and everything else. For every music theory book written, you got a different theory. And it is incredibly unknown, you know. And I think, I don't know what the answer is. You know, you look at one system and then we got 12 notes and you say, well, the next note's 13. That's the first note of the next octave instead of 7 and 8. Or, you know, where does this 13 come from? Where does this 7 come from? Where do all these things come from? And you can go to India and you get a 64-note octave. So that, I think somewhere in this murkiness of musical theory, the principles of 1 becoming 3, which doubles, and then you got the 7, and how that evolves. It's like Genesis, you know, it starts with 1 and then it goes into 6 and 7. You got 3 octaves. That happens 3 times in Genesis. So we have all these different, there's a fundamental thing here, and I've said for years and years and years, that once we resolve this question of how these numbers evolve from the 1 number, using these natural principles, universal principles, we're going to answer a lot of things when that happens, and we're getting kind of close to it. Question here.
Can you walk through an example of how you would find a person's musical note on that?
Sure.
Just use a person.
If we use conventional technology to determine a keynote, and how they do that is they take an object and they zap frequencies at it until it responds in a resonant note, until it starts to resonate. And then we know what its resonant frequencies are. You can't really do that with a human being and expect them to survive. So thinking at it from a reverse angle, kind of like this motor over here, you say, well, gee, you know, a human being comes into existence in tune with the universe at the time they're born. The physical organism has to be in tune with the natural forces for it to come into existence, or it probably couldn't. I'm going to take that as a given, and it has to be in tune with the universal forces. If that's true, then it's real simple. We get an astrological chart, throw away the astrology part, keep the astronomy part, say where was the Earth in relation to the Sun when this person was born? And that's mathematics. Nobody can argue with that. And that's what I've done with this chart. So if we say this is March 21st, the beginning of the solar year, and we divide this circle into 365 days, the Earth going around the Sun is what it is, then we find out what day you're born on, and we could read right off this chart what your keynote is. It's that simple. And then we can do the same thing with all the planets. Where were they in relation to the Sun when the person was born? Because that configuration of the planet is, an exemplification, is the universal forces at that time. Because they wouldn't be where they are unless the universal forces put them there. So they're obeying natural law just like everything else. So they're going to be where they're supposed to be. So we can go back and take a snapshot of those forces using this as a key, that the musical notes as they evolve from keys. And that's a very complicated, it's not that it's complicated, they said it takes a lot of insight to understand the evolution of music through keys. I haven't yet understood that. But I see the process. It goes up 5 steps and comes down 4 steps, something like that. And then the keys evolve one from another. And it's a natural thing. This is the natural way sound and music progresses. Getting back to a question someone was going to ask me is part of this thing, too. Natural music is not the same thing as artificial music, what we hear every day on the radio. Natural tones will evolve into subharmonics and superharmonics as shown somewhat as we've shown on this chart. They will naturally create these tones. If you sound this tone, these all sound at the same time. I mean, it's instant, they're there. Maybe we can't hear them, but they're still there. They're always there. I just lost my thought. I mean, it's instant, they're there. Maybe we can't hear them, but they're still there. They're always there. I just lost my thought. When we sound a keynote, as you were born, you're born on a given day, you're going to have that keynote. Let's say you're born March 22nd, to kind of make it easy. Key of C is the first note that is evolved from this natural process. So we have the numbers and the frequencies will naturally correlate with each other. They naturally evolve from it. It's a natural thing. It's kind of like the Fibonacci series, which is musical, by the way, versus man-made music, which they got together, I think it was 1934 or 24, and they says the note A ought to be 440 cycles per second, because from that number we can tune all the other instruments, and every music written in every country can be played on every instrument in every country, and it all sounds good. Well, that's the key right there. That's where it falls apart. It sounds good. Nature doesn't care one whit what we think. It sounds good, it sounds bad, they don't care. Nature is natural, and it will do what nature will do. When we create artificial ideas about what we think is good, and you know, we start stumbling along the way, and that's what's happened. Part of what's happened.
Does nature have a tuning mechanism? Like, how would you start your basses? What would be a natural sound that you could start for, say, a bass note? And the other question is that why the human voice potentially is more harmonic and easier on the ears, easier on the body for tuning than... Anyway, the first question, is there anything in nature that will give you a bass note rather than an instrument? Or is that a goofy question?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a good question.
Like 8 cycles per second of the Earth, or the waves? Or...
You know, I had that same question years ago, and I said, well, where do we start? You know, what's the frequency, what's the benchmark frequency we can hang everything on? And there's only one. That's right there. You got to start with one. 1 cycle per second, 1 cycle per time interval. And then from that,